know, Johnny, I've never been to Las Vegas.
You've never been there yourself?
I've played all around the country over there, and I've never been to Las Vegas. I was kind of afraid of it, too. I was afraid I might get involved with some, well...
There's a side of Jim Reeves's story that's been quietly buried for decades. And the truth? It's anything but comforting. You ever get that feeling like something never quite added up, but you couldn't put your finger on it? That's exactly what fans and historians have felt for years. I mean, it was ruled an accident. But the moment you start scratching the surface, you realize someone, somewhere, didn't want the whole story told. If you've ever loved a Jim Reeves song, then you need to stick around till the very last second of this video. Come along. Jim Reeves' mystery finally solved. For nearly 60 years, fans of Jim Reeves clung to the same heartbreaking but straightforward story. A beloved country crooner, caught in bad weather, piloting a small aircraft he wasn't fully trained to fly. A tragic accident, yes, but not something anyone thought to question too deeply. But recent investigations have turned that long-standing narrative on its head, and what's coming to light now is not only shocking, it's deeply unsettling. It's as if, all these years, the curtain had been drawn just enough to block the truth, and only now are we finally peeking behind it. So what really happened on that fateful day in 1964? And why did it take this long to come out? It turns out that Jim Reeves may never have been fit to fly in the first place. According to newly revealed Federal Aviation Administration records, he had a heart condition serious enough to get him classified as 4F during World War II, which meant he was unfit for military service. If the U.S. Army didn't think it was safe for him to serve back then, how did he end up getting a pilot's license just weeks before his crash? That's the question aviation experts are now scrambling to answer. The rules for private pilots have always required that applicants be in stable health, especially when it comes to their heart. So if Jim had a known heart irregularity, why was no red flag raised? Who overlooked what? Or worse, what if someone deliberately looked the other way? Jim Reeves was a legend, but what really happened to him? For years, fans have asked the same questions, and now we finally have answers. But they're not what anyone expected. What if the truth turns everything you thought you knew upside down? Stick around, because the ending will leave you speechless. Biographer Larry Jordan, who has spent years sifting through thousands of pages of documents, might have found the missing puzzle piece. In his research, he concluded that Jim likely suffered a cardiac episode while in the cockpit. That idea, once thought of as wild speculation, is now being taken seriously by medical experts who have reviewed the case. In fact, they've pointed out that the strange flight path recorded by air traffic control matches what you'd expect from a pilot who suddenly became incapacitated. One moment steady, the next erratic, lost, and finally silent. Could it be that Jim Reeves's heart gave out mid-air, leaving him powerless to control the plane? And then comes the part that's hardest to swallow, the idea that all of this may have been deliberately hidden. Why would anyone do that? As it turns out, money played a key role. Life insurance policies often include fine print that voids coverage for pilots with medical conditions they failed to disclose. If Jim's heart problem had been officially acknowledged, any payout from insurance would have been at risk. But it goes deeper than money. Mary Reeves, Jim's widow, was fiercely protective of his legacy. Some say she feared that if the public ever found out the crash wasn't just a case of bad luck, it might stain his image, maybe even hurt record sales. So instead of challenging the narrative, she let the official story stand. Isn't it strange how grief and business can sometimes blur into one another? Fans have been left with a complicated mix of emotions. Some say they feel relieved to finally hear what might be the real story, even if it's tragic in a whole new way. Others say they'd rather not know. They prefer to remember Jim as the smooth-voiced gentleman who gave the world timeless classics, not a man whose death may have been quietly covered up. And who can blame them? No one likes to rewrite the ending of a story they've held close for most of their life. But as painful as it is, history must be told fully, especially when it involves someone who meant so much to so many. Now, with this new information out in the open, music historians are being forced to rethink how they talk about Jim Reeves. His voice helped shape the golden age of country music. He brought elegance to the genre and was loved not just in America, but all around the world. But now, his final chapter, once thought to be a closed book, is being rewritten. Posthumous fame and the unresolved questions. Unlike most celebrities who fade quietly into history after their deaths, Jim Reeves somehow grew even bigger in fame long after his tragic plane crash in 1964. Isn't it strange how some stars seem to shine even brighter after they're gone? His smooth, velvety voice, often called the voice of velvet, didn't just echo through jukeboxes of the 50s and 60s. It went on to dominate airwaves and hearts for decades. Jim's story didn't end when his life did. In fact, many would argue the real story was just beginning. And right at the heart of that story was Mary Reeves, his widow, who, despite her grief, picked up the reins of Jim's musical empire like someone who had always been quietly preparing for a storm. People often imagine widows as fragile figures retreating into silence, but Mary was different. She became the keeper of the flame, turning her late husband's voice into a posthumous brand that never stopped speaking. After Jim's death, she took over his estate with an intensity that surprised many. She wasn't just mourning, she was managing. She carefully released just enough of his unreleased material to keep fans intrigued, but never oversaturated. Between 1964 and 1967 alone, Jim had 6 hits. How many artists can say they made the Hall of Fame after death? He did. And from 1970 through 1984, his songs kept climbing the charts, making it feel like he had never truly left. It's almost as if Mary turned his absence into a kind of haunting presence. She made a deal with RCA, giving them access to the vault of unheard music, but with one strict condition. No RCA artist was allowed to cover his songs. That decision alone speaks volumes. It wasn't just about keeping the music alive, it was about keeping it his. And for years, this strategy worked beautifully. But time, as it often does, began to wear down even the strongest walls. By the mid-1990s, Mary's health began to decline. Dementia took its slow toll, and in a decision that shocked many, she sold Jim's entire catalog to United Shows of America for $7.6 million. That deal marked the end of an era. She passed away in 1999, leaving behind a legacy that was both triumphant and tinged with quiet sorrow. Yet, the story didn't end there, because Jim's voice kept resurfacing. Fans were stunned when, in 2024, a new CD dropped out of nowhere. 20 tracks. Some songs nobody even knew existed. Can you imagine hearing a voice from 1948 suddenly fill your room in crisp clarity? One of those songs was recorded back when Jim was just a radio host. Another, I'm a Hit Again, had been made just days before his fatal crash, recorded in his very own basement. There's something eerie about that, isn't there? Like he was unknowingly singing his own farewell. These tracks weren't just dusted off and thrown into the world, they were carefully restored. Modern producers added instrumentation that honored the original feel while giving it new life. Larry Jordan, Jim's biographer, refused to work with anything but original analog sources, no digital gimmicks. And one of the most famous examples of this posthumous revival was Distant Drums. It was just a demo, but Mary approved the overdubs. When it was released in 1966, it soared to #1 in the UK and stayed there for 5 straight weeks. Then came something truly unexpected. Duets with other legends who had also passed. including a strangely moving collaboration with Patsy Cline. It raised eyebrows, some loved it, some found it unsettling, but no one could deny it was powerful. With each new release, fans got more invested. But the more they heard, the more questions they had. Some began to wonder, was it really all recorded before his death? Was it possible that Jim had faked his death and was secretly living somewhere, recording in silence? One theory insisted he was hiding out in the Channel Islands, still making music at age 53. Others claimed he never boarded the doomed flight at all. Most fans, of course, called these ideas malicious stories, but that didn't stop the whispers. And then there were the truly bizarre ones, the kind that make you pause for a second and wonder, could there be something here? Some conspiracy theorists linked Jim Reeves to the JFK assassination. They claimed he'd once seen Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby together at a bar in Dallas, where his band was playing. It's wild, right? And yet, these theories kept coming. Another persistent rumor said Jim's will had included instructions that only one song be released each year, as a way to slowly preserve his stardom. Mary firmly denied it, but the rumor never fully disappeared. And yet, before all the mystery, the myths, the wreckage, and the rumors, there was just a boy from Texas with a voice too smooth for his own time. To understand the man Jim Reeves became and why people refused to let his name rest, you have to go all the way back to where it started. Stay with us, because what's coming next is more than history. It's the making of a quiet icon. Let's rewind and look at the early life and rise of Jim Reeves. The early life and rise of Jim Reeves. It's honestly hard to believe that a quiet boy from a tiny Texas town, just a speck on the map, would one day grow into one of country music's most unforgettable voices. But that's exactly what happened with James Travis Reeves, better known to the world as Jim Reeves. He was born on August 20th, 1923, in Galloway, Texas, near Carthage, a humble, rural place where life was simple but often harsh. People close to him would later say that the tough beginnings he experienced as the youngest of 9 children shaped him deeply. He came into the world at a time when the country was still recovering from the aftermath of World War I, and would later find himself growing up during the Great Depression. And as if life wasn't already hard enough, tragedy struck early. His father, Thomas Reeves, passed away when Jim was still just a baby. That loss forced his older brothers to give up their schooling and work to keep the family afloat. In the middle of all that hardship, how does a little boy hold on to joy? For Jim, the answer was music. Even at the tender age of 5, Jim showed signs of being cut from a different cloth. He somehow managed to get his hands on a battered guitar, one that was missing a few strings. But fate smiled on him when a kind oil worker noticed and not only fixed the instrument, but also taught the eager young boy a few chords. It was a small act that would end up changing the course of Jim's life. From then on, his love for music only deepened. By age 9, just imagine, 9, he was already performing a regular 15-minute show on a Shreveport radio station. That kind of talent doesn't hide for long, and it didn't with Jim. Throughout his youth, while other kids were busy with school dances and chores, Jim was out performing at local events and playing guitar with bands, gaining experience and building his stage presence long before he ever dreamed of stardom. But music wasn't the only path he considered. Like many young Southern boys, Jim also had a deep love for sports, especially baseball. After graduating from Carthage High School in 1942, he was awarded an athletic scholarship to the University of Texas at Austin. He enrolled there to study speech and drama, perhaps an early sign that the stage, in one form or another, would always call to him. But college life didn't quite fit, and after only 6 weeks, he dropped out to work in the shipyards of Houston during the war. It wasn't that he didn't want to serve. He actually volunteered for military duty. But he failed his physical, most likely due to a heart condition. and was given 4F draft status in 1943. What do you do when your plans for the future keep getting cut short? For Jim, the answer was to pivot. After the military dream fell through, he returned to baseball and joined the St. Louis Cardinals farm team in 1944 as a promising right-handed pitcher. For a while, things looked bright. But once again, fate had a different plan. During a game, Jim severely injured his sciatic nerve, a devastating injury that ended his baseball dreams for good. Imagine pouring your heart into something, only to have it taken from you in an instant. That's the kind of disappointment that could crush a person. But not Jim. By 1947, Jim was looking for a new beginning. He found one in broadcasting, landing a job as an announcer at KGRI in Henderson, Texas. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a chance to stay close to music and even promote his own performances. That same year, he met Mary White, a school teacher who would become his wife and lifelong supporter. People often say behind every successful man is a strong woman, and in Jim's case, that couldn't be more true. Mary was someone who saw his gift and encouraged him not to let go of it. Even while building his career in radio, Jim never stopped chasing music. He sang anywhere he could, at dances, in bars, with bands like Moon Mullicans. He soaked up inspiration from a wide mix of artists, blending the country twang of Jimmie Rodgers and the swing of Moon Mullican with the smooth crooning of Bing Crosby, Eddie Arnold, and Frank Sinatra. In 1949, he made his first recordings for the small Macy label in Houston, though those early songs didn't gain much traction. He sometimes performed under the name Sunny Day back then, perhaps a sign that he was still figuring out exactly who he was meant to be in the world of music. Then came a turning point that almost felt like something out of a movie. In 1952, Jim moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, to work at KWKH, the home of the legendary Louisiana Hayride radio program. At first, he was just a nighttime DJ, occasionally doing announcing work on shows like the Red River Roundup. But one fateful night changed everything. When the scheduled performer for the Hayride didn't show up, Jim was asked to fill in. It was a last-minute call, but he stepped onto that stage, performed, and absolutely blew the audience away. That spontaneous performance became the spark that ignited his full-blown singing career. From there, things moved quickly. That same year, he signed with Abbott Records and officially entered the world of professional music recording. Finally, after years of small-town shows, radio gigs, and personal heartbreaks, Jim Reeves was beginning to step into the spotlight he had long deserved. Because, make no mistake, the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. What came next was a series of moments that didn't just define a career, they shaped a legend. And if you think you know how it all unfolded, you might want to stick around, because the story behind Jim Reeves's rise is filled with twists, sacrifices, and emotional turns that most fans never hear about. Now let's dive into the making of a legend. And trust me, you'll want to stay with this one till the very end. The making of a legend. Jim Reeves's rise to stardom was the kind of story that made people believe anything was possible with talent, timing, and a little twist of fate. People who knew him back when he was just a smooth-voiced radio announcer in Texas could hardly believe how fast everything changed. It wasn't like he gradually tiptoed into fame. No, Jim practically leapt. In just a few short years, he went from spinning other people's records to becoming one of the most beloved voices in country music history. And let's be honest, when you hear that velvety voice of his, don't you wonder how long it would have stayed hidden if Mexican Joe hadn't come along? That song, yes, the quirky, toe-tapping, fiddle-filled number called Mexican Joe, wasn't just a lucky hit. It was the exact spark Reeves needed to light up the national charts. Written by Mitchell Torok, and featuring the playful energy of Big Red Haze on fiddle and Floyd Kramer on piano, Mexican Joe came bursting through the speakers into our artis spoofers. and didn't slow down. It sat comfortably at the top of the country charts for 6 weeks and held its spot somewhere on the charts for a jaw-dropping 26 weeks. Before that, Jim had been dropping singles here and there with modest regional attention, but nothing had managed to stick. Until Joe. Suddenly, Reeves wasn't just some guy from Texas with a good voice. He was a star. And once he had that breakthrough, there was no slowing down. Almost immediately, he followed up Mexican Joe with another hit, Bimbo, a song he wrote himself. With each new song, he showed he wasn't just a flash in the pan or a novelty act. Jim Reeves was building something bigger, a name, a brand, a sound. The industry noticed. RCA Victor noticed. By 1955, they had him signed, and that's when things really took a turn. That same year, Reeves released Yonder Comes a Sucker, his first single with RCA, and it landed him right in the country top 10. It wasn't just a lucky strike anymore. Jim was on a roll. As if 1955 wasn't already career-defining enough, Jim Reeves also joined the Grand Ole Opry that October. To be invited into the Opry was like being knighted in country music, and Jim didn't take it lightly. He moved to Nashville that same month, embracing the center of the music world with open arms. From then on, his name practically lived on the charts. From Yonder Comes a Sucker in '55 all the way to 1969, you could bet money on seeing his name week after week. How many artists can say that? But Jim wasn't satisfied with just doing what everyone else was doing. He had his sights on something different, something smoother. Back in those days, most country singers belted out their songs in a twangy, loud, hillbilly style. Jim wasn't interested in fitting that mold. He once said, "One of these days, I'm gonna sing like I want to sing." And boy, did he mean it. The moment that dream became reality was in 1957 when Four Walls came out. That song, gentle, warm, and heartbreakingly sincere, was a departure from the bouncy tunes like Mexican Joe. It wasn't just country, it was country pop, and it introduced audiences to a different side of Jim Reeves. Even while he was overseas on tour, the song was quietly climbing both the pop and country charts, eventually hitting #1 on country and #11 on pop. Behind the scenes, a huge part of that transformation was thanks to his work with producer Chet Atkins. Together, they crafted what came to be known as the Nashville Sound. The trick? Jim toned it down. He started singing softer, deeper, more intimately, almost like he was whispering right into your ear. He'd sing with his lips nearly touching the microphone, and with Chet layering in strings, backup vocals, and rich arrangements, the result was something that felt brand new, but instantly classic. Then came He'll Have to Go. Released in late 1959, the song was everything that new sound represented. Smooth, emotional, and universally relatable. It wasn't just another hit, it was the hit. The track stayed at #1 on the country charts for 14 straight weeks, peaked at #2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and climbed charts all over the globe, #1 in Canada, #1 in Australia. It wasn't just Americans who were swooning over Reeves. His voice was reaching living rooms in Britain, India, Scandinavia, and South Africa. How many country singers could say that back then? The final days and the mysterious crash. It was a story that many in country music still whisper about with heavy hearts. A moment in time that took away a rising legend, just as he was starting to soar higher than ever before. July of 1964 wasn't just another hot summer month. It became the painful marker of Jim Reeves's tragic end, a loss that still feels fresh to those who loved his music. In truth, Reeves was just entering the prime of his career. His smooth baritone voice had already set him apart, earning him the nickname Gentleman Jim, and fans across America, and even around the world, were beginning to realize just how special he was. But then came that ill-fated flight on July 31st, 1964, and everything changed forever. How could someone so talented, so careful, and so seemingly invincible fall victim to a flight that should have been simple, short, and uneventful? That day began with what should have been a celebratory moment. Reeves had just closed a real estate deal in Arkansas, something he was doing more of lately as he looked to secure a future beyond music. He and his trusted manager and friend, Dean Manuel, took off from Batesville Regional Airport in a small Beechcraft Debonair. It was just a two-person aircraft, sleek and manageable. Remarkably, Reeves had only gotten his private pilot's license a month before. Think about that, just a month. While it was certainly an exciting new skill for him, many would later wonder, was he really ready for unpredictable skies? That plane, registered as N8972M, was headed for Nashville, a 280-mile trip, the kind pilots make all the time without thinking twice. But the skies had a different plan. As they approached Brentwood, Tennessee, just 9 miles away from the Nashville airport, the weather turned. A thunderstorm rolled in, thick and violent. What had started as a smooth flight became a race against nature. At around 4:51 p.m., Reeves was in communication with Nashville's air traffic control, which clearly instructed him to turn right to dodge the storm. But strangely, Reeves turned left instead, reportedly trying to follow Franklin Road visually, as if that would help guide him through the chaos. It was a devastating mistake. By turning left, he steered the plane deeper into the heart of the storm, where the wind, rain, and poor visibility overwhelmed even the most experienced pilots. In the days that followed, confusion and speculation swirled. People didn't just want answers, they needed them. How could this happen? Why didn't he listen to the tower? One rumor came from his wife, Mary Reeves, who, perhaps in a state of grief and confusion, once mentioned that he might have been flying upside down while trying to climb. It was a strange image and a terrifying one. But eyewitnesses later dismissed that theory, confirming that the plane wasn't inverted before the crash. So what really happened? Musician Marty Robbins, who lived nearby, said he actually heard the plane go down. That eerie moment stuck with him, and he quickly pointed rescuers toward the area where he'd heard the crash. When the wreckage was finally found, the engine was partially buried in the ground, and signs of a small fire were present. Nothing explosive, but enough to speak of a hard, fast impact. Investigators later pieced together the likely sequence of events. As Reeves fought to see through the pounding rain, he lost crucial airspeed, something deadly in a small aircraft. In those final seconds, perhaps panicking, he did what many inexperienced pilots might do. He slammed the throttle and pulled back on the yoke, hoping to climb out of danger. But at that low altitude, it only made things worse. The aircraft stalled completely and went into a fatal spin, one that couldn't be recovered from so close to the ground. The search that followed was massive. For 44 hours, nearly 2,000 people, yes, 2,000, searched high and low across nearly 20 square miles of dense Tennessee woods. Among those searching were fellow country music stars Chet Atkins, Eddie Arnold, Ernest Tubb, Stonewall Jackson, all walking through the wilderness, hoping, maybe even praying, for a miracle. But the wreckage was finally discovered on August 2nd, and at exactly 1:00 p.m. that afternoon, the unthinkable news broke over the radio. Jim Reeves was dead. The announcement spread like wildfire, echoing through every honky-tonk, kitchen radio, and record store in America. Fans didn't just mourn. They grieved as though they'd lost a member of their own family. And who could blame them? Here was a man who had redefined the sound of country music, who crossed over to pop without ever losing his Southern soul. A man who could croon a love song and bring grown men to tears. People often say that tragedy doesn't knock, it just arrives. And in Jim Reeves's case, it came in the form of a stormy sky, a wrong turn, and a moment of fear that forever changed the course of country music history. So many still ask, what might have been if he had just waited out the weather, or listened to the tower, or if the storm had come just a few minutes later? There are no easy answers, only the haunting reality that one of the genre's most promising voices was silenced far too soon. And even now, decades later, his records still spin, his voice still plays, and fans still wonder, what would Jim Reeves have become if only he had landed safely that day? With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.